Today, I'm really excited to be able to present my research that I undertook as part of my doctoral thesis towards becoming an education and child psychologist. So the title of my research was "They will listen to the expert but not to the parent, listening to the stories of parents who actively advocate for their child's autism assessment." And I've provided a hyperlink there on the title page to be able to access the full thesis. I want to start with just reminding everyone how important it is our individual safety needs. Thinking about yourself, so if you need to get a drink, go to the toilet, please do. There is a recording, so you will be able to access this after this live session as well. Considering your own safety needs too, the research might be something that resonates with things going on in your personal lives or casework that you've undertaken, and it's important to be aware of our own emotions and what is appropriate for ourselves. So if you need to take some time out or to speak to someone after the session, please do so. So thinking about my research project, I was really wary about choosing a title and a project. I knew that it had to be something that was meaningful for myself, because I would otherwise struggle to be able to really give such a big breadth of time and to remain focused and for it to maintain my interest. So I wanted it to be meaningful. I was aware that we would be spending a significant amount of the 3-year process to train as an EP on this research project, and how it would be the culminating piece of work which would be assessed to be able to become an EP. During my reading, I found lots and lots of advice about not choosing something that was extremely personal. So Stimson share how be wary of choosing something that resonates too closely with your own personal experience. Rudstrom and Newton share avoid topics that may be too closely linked with emotional issues within your own life. Also stating a topic needs to sustain your interest over a long period of time. And like I say, it had to be meaningful for me so that I didn't disengage. So I don't think I took heed of the advice in literature. So I reflected on critical incidents in my own life, and TRIP identifies critical incidents as some event or situation which marked a significant turning point or change in the life of a person. Brandenburg shares that critical incidents are usually an interaction, often verbal, which initiate a form of reflective practice. And Tummins and Duckworth talk about how this reflection process allows you to plan and carry out research to explore, can allow you to carry out and plan research and explore the incident further. They further share how it can lead to new understandings relating to the situations, and subsequently new understandings for ourselves if the research is around critical incidents that might have occurred in your lives. So I reflected upon my own experiences, and something that was quite significant at that moment in time in my life was going through the autism diagnostic pathway for my second child. So my little boy is Hussain. Like I say, he's the second child, the second of 4 at that time, the second of 3. And I just recall there being quite significant differences in his presentation in comparison to his sibling. My background prior to training as an EP was also that I was a severe special needs teacher, working in a school with children with profound and multiple learning difficulties. So I was aware of his milestones, of experiences that he found difficult, and you can't unknow, being a teaching practitioner, milestones. Equally, as a parent, you can't unknow when your children present extremely differently to one another, if there are older siblings or younger siblings. So I advocated for his assessment, and we eventually received his diagnosis just before his 4th birthday. And I recall I'd started the process as a teacher, and actually the end of the process fell into my first year of EP training. So it was all very much a valid experience and something that I was working through as part of my during my time training as an EP, and I just couldn't then think of a better topic to, which was meaningful and important to myself than this to explore. I also recall reading around the idea of passionate scholarship, and it really resonated with my position. So passionate scholarship refers to a commitment to a personally meaningful and socially relevant topic close to the heart. And this definitely was. It was about my little baby and the experience that we'd had in advocating for him and finally getting that diagnosis. Autism. The Autistic Society defines autism as autism is a lifelong developmental disability that affects how a person communicates with and relates to other people and how they experience the world around them. But it's important to identify that the concept of autism is complex and there are multiple paradigms and perspectives of understanding that can be adopted. Carthay identifies how a biomedical model is the most dominant model of understanding autism, which has resulted in the preclusion of alternative lenses by which to consider autism. However, it is recognised that the conceptual framing of the biomedical lens has been strongly informed by genetic and cognitive theories. But it's important to recognise that autism is a clinical diagnosis. So when considering psychoanalytic and cognitive paradigms, theories to assist understanding with these models include things like executive function, weak central coherence, reduced theory of mind, and attachment. Critical autism studies, however, moves away from this and positions themselves within a social model of disability, recognising that it's the systems and attitudes and environments which within society which disable people. And that's referenced from Catherine Runswick called 2016. Woods et al. Further shares how the Rethinking Autism Network suggests that autism is purely a cultural construct. However, Stanton shares how many of those individuals living with autism affirm that to deny them the label is to deny a valid part of their identity. For the purpose of my research and for the work that I undertook, I did refer to the biomedical definition of autism, and that was important as part of my research process. So when it came to thinking about my research area and area of interest, I wanted to explore how do parents experience the role of advocating for their child's autism assessment. I didn't specifically have a set question. It was about listening to the stories of those parents. Because what I didn't want to do was restrict the conversations that might inevitably happen as part of that process. So thinking about my positionality, I felt like I was an insider. I was a parent that had gone through the diagnostic process, but equally I was also a practitioner at that time, or on the journey of being a practitioner as a training educational psychologist. So thinking about my research project, I knew that I wanted to listen to the stories of parents who had advocated for their child's autism assessment. I didn't want there to be closed questions. It wasn't about finding a truth. It was actually about providing a space and a platform for parents to be listened to and to be heard and for their experiences to be shared, because I'd recall that at times it felt quite isolating being a parent going through this experience and not having a network of individuals that I could share my experiences with. I also recognized that I didn't subscribe to realist natural science approaches that were based upon objectivity and traditional science, and that reductionist approach, which it posits testing and hypothesis and truth as the core to good research, but rather that I've situated myself in the interpretivist branch of research and recognize the humanistic qualities of qualitative research methodology. And that actually, as a listener, when narrators, so I didn't use the term participants, I used the term narrators, shared their stories, that I was socially constructing that research by listening to it. It was a relational process. I was listening and responding in that moment, rather than there being closed questions and a structured interview process that we would be undertaking. So my methodology focused on stories, and I really like these quotes by Colin Clandin. The main claim for the use of narrative in educational research is that humans are storytelling organisms who individually and socially lead storied lives. The study of narrative, therefore, is the study of the ways humans experience the world. And Reisman states, telling stories about past events seems to be a universal human activity. I reflected, like I said, about my intersubjectivity. Having gone through the experience as a parent, I had a better understanding of certain terms and what the process involved, and it provided me with the intersubjectivity relating to understanding around the topic area. During the literature review, there were some interesting conclusions. So parents are frequently faced with a slow and frustrating period of uncertainty, and the worry they find themselves in the position of trying to convince their children's doctors that there is a need for specialist assessment. I found Woodgate shares how parents of children with autism are faced with many challenges. Harlan and Moore share in their conclusions how early concerns by parents must be taken more seriously. And in an article by Runswick and Cole, they identify how for parents of disabled children, the role of the advocate develops to a frequency and complexity that other parents do not face. This was an important part of my research because I often found, particularly within practitioners, there was always the question of why a diagnosis, and we need to shift away from a medical model, and I completely understood the questions posed, but I felt it was important to reflect upon why parents might want to diagnose or advocate for a diagnosis. So Crane shares that parents hold the assumption that obtaining a formal autism diagnosis will act as an entryway to help. Sharman and Stone identify how for many families the primary objective in inquiring a diagnosis for a child in preschool or younger is to gain access to services. And research by Crane identified in over 1,000 parents that actually that wasn't the case, and that they didn't receive, 40% of them didn't receive that post-diagnostic support. But other reasons were often parents were pathologized for the behaviors that young people presented with, and it was deemed as negative parenting rather than recognizing that this was a young person that experienced some difficulty. So in a way, it acted as a vindication for parents. But furthermore, current research by Stagg and Belcher explored the experience of 9 adults aged over 50 who had recently received an autism diagnosis, and findings uncovered how individuals had been treated for depression and anxiety and identified that they'd experienced feeling like an alien and isolated while growing up. Individuals described the diagnosis as positive, allowing for reconfiguration of their identity and appreciation of their individual needs. I really like this quote by Maya Angelou, who shares, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." And furthermore, this by Carrie and Russell, "If our preferred story of who we are remains only a conversation in our own head, it will not have the sense of being real. The sense of realness or authenticity only comes when our preferred stories are witnessed and responded to by a significant audience." So as part of seeking narrators to participate within my research, there were 4 particular things that I identified. So those were, are you the parent or a carer of a young person with an autism diagnosis? Number 1. Number 2, have they had a diagnosis for longer than 1 year, and did they get the diagnosis within the last 3 years? And that was really because of changes within the NICE guidelines and thinking about diagnostic assessment procedures that might have been used and how systems are constantly re-evaluating their practice. Number 3 was, did you recognise the presentation of needs first? And number 4 was, did you advocate, encourage or support the autism assessment? The sample was purposive, and I had 4 parents, 4 mothers that chose to take part. And Reisman shares our narrative approaches are not appropriate for studies of large numbers of nameless and faceless subjects. I undertook unstructured interviews, and that was because I recognised that I would be co-constructing the data, and I didn't want closed questions just to be presented to narrators. I wanted to listen to their stories. As a listener, I recognised that that was a relational experience. It constituted as a short social interaction. And by listening and engaging and responding, I too was a part of that research and co-constructing that research. Furthermore, I found during my reading that feminist researchers shared how unstructured interviews are often adopted by qualitative researchers who advocate feminist and emancipatory approaches. And as a biological male, what I didn't want was for questions to be closed and for parents, for mothers to feel intimidated. I wanted it to be an open dialogue. I wanted there to be space to really listen to those stories and for there not to be the pressure of answering questions. But what I did do was I came up with these bullet points just in case if that was too overwhelming and if parents wanted something to refer back to. So there weren't questions, but there were some bullet points of things that parents might want to think about talking to. The analysis was the thematic analysis, and I won't go into the individual steps of this. But what I did choose to do was I wanted to be creative in my analysis process. And so I chose to create evocative posters and word clouds as part of my research. I wanted something visual that could be shared back with parents. Excuse my drawings, I'm not an artist. But what I did find was that it helped me to better understand things, but also it provided something that I could share back before the research was completed during that analysis process. I appreciated that methodology was a contextual framework which would aid to guide my choices, but I didn't want it to constrain my creativity, and actually by creating the evocative posters for each of the narrators and being able to share them, I was able to receive feedback. So Carla, I've used pseudonyms, obviously this is for Carla, and Carla shared, absolutely fantastic. You've summarized our story to perfection. This shows our journey completely. Laura shared, this visual drawing is an accurate representation of myself and what I went through. It's amazing to look back and reflect on everything I went through. In some areas, I'm still going through it. Thank you for portraying my story in a respectful but true manner. This is Bianca's poster on word cloud, and this was Karen's evocative poster on word cloud. And the reason why it was important is because Claire shares how we experience wonder in our bodies, and responses such as a gut feeling or increased heartbeat are important. And actually, I was feeling with the research. So when these posters were created, I never actually thought I was going to share them as part of my research project. I knew I was going to share them with the parents, but I didn't think they would be a part of my final submission. But actually, I felt they were a real important part of my journey and process in understanding the research, and they were submitted as part of that process. So my reason why, so I initially shared my reason why was Kaysan, my second oldest child, but never did I expect during my research journey that I would actually be going through the process again whilst writing the thesis. So my youngest son, Mason, was born during my second year as a trainee educational psychologist. He experienced a traumatic birth and had a Kefla hematomas in the first picture. You can see a large part of his skull is swollen, and there was blood built up under that, and it took 6 months for that to go down. And I recognized some significant differences in Mason's presentation, and when I explored my reading, I had come across a comprehensive study of relative reoccurrence risk of autism with a sample of 1.6 million families in Sweden, which identified the heritability of ASD to be approximately 50%. The research concluded the risk of autism is increased tenfold if a full sibling has the diagnosis and about twofold if a cousin has the diagnosis. And we started our process again. So the themes that came out in the research, I couldn't restrict the themes. So these were the holistic themes that came out in the whole of the research. But then I did specifically focus on themes that were related to my research interest. And those are the themes that I will be speaking to today and sharing. So we've got challenging professionals / systems, fight, waiting, concern dismissed, education experience, and evidence. So here are some specific quotes from, and I won't read all of them, but I might just choose one. So challenging professionals, Bianca shared, I said, how long will we wait for those assessments? When he's year 6 and leaving to secondary, and I've got a kid who's fallen apart, so we need to have something in place for him at that point. Woodgate et al. Highlight in their research that parents become more direct as a form of challenging professionals. In this situation, it's clear that Bianca's catastrophizing because she wants to get her child the support that she feels he needs. Research by Todd and Jones, 2003, explored mothers' perceptions on dealing with professionals, and qualitative research was undertaken with 30 mothers of young children with intellectual disabilities. And the research study confirmed that mothers' dealings with professionals were problematic for them. The research also identified that mothers were willing to challenge professionals' perspective of their children, which is important. And maybe if other agencies were adopting the Rotherham Charter values and working in co-production, this wouldn't be the case. And I'll talk about those core values a little bit later on. The theme around fight, so Laura shared, I did not understand how much of a battle and fight it would be to get them the support, even with all these letters and the professional help. Carla shared, you've got to keep the ball rolling, you've got to keep in contact with everybody, and you've got to keep fighting them, most definitely. Research by Woodgate et al. Of 16 families of children living with autism identified how parents described how they had to become more direct to fight all the battles. Parents identified they had to change their behavior, more specifically around not becoming emotional and being more direct. Carlson et al. 2016 undertook qualitative research with parents of 11 children diagnosed with autism. Parents highlighted that they continuously had to fight for support for their children in every situation with authorities and throughout the school system. It's alarming to hear that systems are unsupportive to parents, and this message is consistent in much of the contemporary literature that I encountered as part of my research. Notion of waiting times. So Bianca shared, and I got a letter saying the waiting list is very long, we'll keep you updated. It was 2 years before he got seen. Carla said, so he said, all right, well, it will be about 12 months. Research by Crane of over 1,000 parents in the UK identified long wait times as the key cause of stress. Crane et al. Confirmed a key finding of their research was that parents typically experience a 3.5-year delay between initially contacting a healthcare professional and finally securing a diagnosis. What was evidence from the narrator stories for me was the distinct differences in regional waiting lists for diagnostic pathway, and Howland and Moore discovered in their research with almost 1,300 UK based parents that it often felt like a postcode lottery. Parents' dissatisfaction with the overall diagnostic process correlated with waiting times, identifying that the longer they had to wait, the more dissatisfied they were with the diagnostic process. This also highlighted in some of the largest research studies with parents such as Howland and Moore and Crane and et al. Concern being dismissed. Carla, I remember going to the 18-month assessment and speaking to them, and all I got was, oh no, he's fine. There's absolutely nothing, absolutely nothing. And I remembered looking it up on the internet like all worried parents do and thinking, hold on, he's got quite a few triggers there for early onset autism. Each of the narrators experienced having their concerns dismissed by a professional at some point during their journey. Thus, it then demonstrates the narrator's resilience, perseverance, and commitment to advocating for their children, that all of them finally secured a diagnosis in the end. Much of the ways in which the professionals dismissed narrators' concerns is similar to that identified by studies by Howland and Moore Harlan and Moore share how parents were told you should not worry and he'll grow out of it. I found it particularly alarming that my research identified that approximately over 20 years on, professionals are still using similar phrases to dismiss parental concerns, as I identified in that research in 1997. And doing my reading, I discovered the work of Sansotti, 2012, who explored the experience of 16 families during the diagnostic process. His research identified that families encounter a 2-year wait for a diagnosis, a delay that was significantly longer acknowledgement of their concerns. Parents also shared instances where their concerns had been disregarded by paediatricians. They identified pressure in them for further assessment and referrals until the persistence paid off and they achieved an autism diagnosis. Education experience. Laura shared, I've worked with autistic children before as a support assistant in a school, done a lot of training around autism in an autistic school. My brother's autistic now, and he's now 28. Current literature identifies that higher levels of maternal education increase the chances of autism diagnosis. Research by Lung et al. 2018 identified that although more children and mothers with lower than average education screened positive for autism using the MCAT, more children and mothers of higher education received a diagnosis. A clear differential there. Research by Kelly et al. Supported similar findings by Mendel et al. 2009 and Lung et al. 2008 regarding higher maternal education and increased likelihood of autism diagnosis. Disparity for parents receiving a diagnosis. So I suppose the question is that disparity of parents receiving a diagnosis with higher education being able to better advocate for their children, young people, and what this means for our parents who are socially, economically deprived or coming from those EAL, BIM communities, limited English spoken language skills. And we reframe our thinking. We don't say hard to reach families. I like to use the term underserviced. What can we do more as services to help those families and parents who are being disproportionately affected by the diagnostic process? Evidence. I thought, right, I've got 6 months now, got 6 months to really get this evidence together. Laura, obviously, eventually after 3 years and her having obviously OT, physio, pediatric consultant, child development, CAMS, speech and language, and people going to view her in nursery, I had enough evidence to say, look at all these people now agree with me, you know. But I think it makes me question why we're so focused on why parents feel it's necessary and how ethical it is to push parents to record their children being distressed or all of the meetings that they're encountering. Why can we not value parents as experts by experience and really value what they're sharing, their lived experience is? So moving on to the implication, I'm very conscious of time and I know this is a whistle-top store, so I apologise for that. But moving on to the implications for EP practice, and I've put some bullet points in here. I think it's integral for us to consider the power control issue when it comes to our work with parent and carers. It's integral that as practitioners we recognise the concept of power and how we aim to address power imbalances that may be present in our everyday interactions with parent and carers, young people that we engage with. And in Rotherham, we really value that we work in co-production. And co-production for us is working in an equal partnership from the start with parents. But this is based upon the premise of providing space and time for parents to share their concerns and for their stories to be heard and valued, and ensuring that we question levels of awareness and understanding in underserviced communities, providing opportunities such as, for example, in our local authority, we provide a drop-in as part of the Parent Carer Forum once a month, where parents can just come and share concerns and we can signpost parents to other services or what steps they might take next. equally, it's about thinking back to the point of power and control. In our service, we refer to ourselves as practitioners rather than professionals, and we assume a questioning, listening role rather than defaulting to an expert position. We recognise that our training provides us with alternative tools and lenses to conceptualise thinking, but this is not viewed as more or less important knowledge than that may be shared by parents. We understand that parents have funds of knowledge that they bring with them, and that actually they are experts by experience and know their young people the best, and we really value that, hence why it's so integral to work in co-production. And then thinking about evidence, how can we support with that process? And evidence doesn't just refer to the diagnostic process. Evidence refers to supporting parents with their writing DLA, supporting letters, supporting with referrals to other services, for example, orthotics, when young people might be self-injuring, and being able to signpost and sharing information that may be otherwise gate-kept. So, for example, parents feeling confident to request an education healthcare assessment, a parental request being put forward and supporting parents in that way as well. Waiting times refers, yes, it refers to the diagnostic process, but equally it refers also to report times and providing appointments for parents and carers to meet EPs and other colleagues that might be able to support. Often parents just don't have the opportunity, and but equally it is around our reports as well. So within our local authority, we have a 6-week turnaround process, but if we have a really anxious parent, how is it that they could be supported if they really need that report or a letter quickly, more quickly than maybe the full report? How can we support with that? So those are the implications for EP practice. Like I said, I apologize that it's a whistle-stop tour. There is so much more that I could say on the topic, but I hope I've just been able to share a little bit. When I spoke about the working in co-production, in Rotherham specifically, we work to the 4 cornerstones of the Rotherham Charter, which is welcome and care, value and include, communicate and work in partnership. And all of those help to foster trust with parents, and they're embedded in all of the work and practice that we do. And nationally, there's been a lot of work that we've shared in around co-production and working to the 4 cornerstones via training that we've provided to other services and local authorities. This is my reference, this is my thesis, which I have hyperlinked in this PowerPoint. And if there's any queries or questions or anything that you would like further clarification on, there is my email address there. But inevitably, I suppose the big message for me is how can we value the experiences that parents bring and recognise them as experts by experience, and really appreciate our own roles in allowing parents a space to be able to share their stories and their experience, and for them to feel valued, and moving away from that expert lens and seeking to work in co-production so that everyone is an equal part of that exchange. Thank you so much. I do have a little video that I would like to share, a video that I've put together for Autism Awareness Week, and then I will look and see if there are any comments or questions. So I will just play this. It might be a little bit loud, so you might want to put your volume down.
Skies so clear, we're ready. Countless days and sleepless nights, holding out for what we knew was near. We're ready. lighten our hand, darling. We don't need to do that.
All we know, we're ready.
Where are we going?
What you got in your hands? Let me see. What is it? Show me.
And every day, all the stops we make along the way, we see it. Through the storm and through the night, we hold on. Hope is on our side. We see it. And for this adventure, we have everything we need. Standing in the sunlight, we can get.
What are you doing there? What is it? Is you happy with yourself? Is it yours? Is you happy with yourself? What is it? Are you excited by your cars?
We have everything we need. Standing in the sunlight, we can get through anything.
Thank you so much for coming along and being here. I'm just going to go to